Hey everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. This video we're going to talk about the shifting of the lunar nodes. We're going to have a nodal shift here coming up on January 11th of 2025. The nodes will be shifting from Aries and Libra, where they've been for the past 18 months, and moving into Pisces and Virgo. So we're going to get a new theme, a new background frequency is kind of the way I like to think about the nodes. Like they sort of set the tone of the background frequency against which all the other transits sort of move and navigate. It's a very interesting sort of metaphor, and I think of this as a kind of archetypal sweep that the nodes make as they move through the zodiac. Remember, they're exactly opposite, so they're always in the polar opposite signs of the zodiac as they transit. And this, I think, calls our attention to something very profound about the very structure of the zodiac itself, that it is actually composed of these 6 pair of polar opposites that make up the 12 signs of the zodiac. And there's something very there's a deep wisdom encoded into these polarities, because while they can seem opposite and often even paradoxical in many ways, there's an invitation to integrate those two. It's the great call of polarity as we know it in these wisdom traditions. How do we integrate these seeming paradoxes into a sort of holistic, integral synthesis, right? This is with a great sort of meta-modern move. I think it's something that we are being called to do, a capacity that we need to have in order to navigate this new world that we are all moving through, right? There's this notion of we're in this postmodernism. Some have called it meta-modernism. And one of the qualities is the ability to hold these two positions at once, to almost superpositioning, right? To be able to hold paradoxes, to see both sides. There's a real wisdom in that. And I think as we're coming through a period of such polarity, right? It's something that we've been assessing in our culture, right? This sort of devastating, crippling almost polarity. We've been so polarized by media, by politics, by just the shifting currents, right? That it's hard for us to really see and appreciate the other side. And so this is something that I think astrology is very good at. And as we examine these pair of nodes and these pair of zodiac signs, it gives us a opportunity to practice this power of integration. So jump in, I'm going to share my screen with you. And I'm calling this theme of this nodal shift from dreams to discernment. And of course, this is reinforcing this sort of thematic of the 2 signs which we are now shifting into, which is Pisces and Virgo. A very watery sign on the one hand, a earth sign on the other. Now, both of these signs are mutable signs. There's something that changes. There's something that shifts with all the mutables. So we can expect this as a background frequency to be one of change, of mutability. We're going to be asked to make a shift in our consciousness that allows for an integration of these 2 signs, these 2 elements, these 2 archetypes. So what does it mean to go from dreams to discernment? Well, first of all, I want to look at just some of the qualities of the nodes. The north node, which is called Rahu, in the Vedic astrology, and the south node, which is called Ketu, which is the head and the tail of the dragon, respectively. Traditionally, the north node points us towards material destiny and karma, whereas the south node is more mystical or spiritual involvement. The north node tends to show us the qualities that are to be developed in this lifetime, where the south node often points to qualities that we have developed in the past or even in past lives, what we bring to the table, so to speak. The north node points to technical skills and talents, while the south node is more associated with the imagination and creativity. The north node tends to be relentless and disciplined, where the south node has the qualities of being sensitive and compassionate. And in general, the qualities of Saturn and Pluto are associated with the north node, while the qualities of Mars and Neptune are associated with the south node, which is a very interesting way to consider these 2 points. And something that's interesting to observe as you consider these qualities, particularly this comparison between a material orientation of the north node with a more mystical or spiritual orientation of the south node, and to consider the nodes moving into Pisces and Virgo. There's a kind of inversion going on where we have the material north node moving into the spiritual domain of Pisces, and the spiritual south node moving into the more practical or mundane or material domain of Virgo. And so that's an interesting theme to consider here, this inversion, and again, a paradox within the paradox that is dealing with any 2 signs of the zodiac that form this polarity relationship. So we get the mutable water of Pisces, right, that wants to dissolve boundaries and move into this oceanic oneness of spirit, right? We are all drops in the universal ocean. It wants us to embrace compassion and unconditional love. It's about the soul. It's about the ethereal, the psychic, fantasy, inspiration, creativity. Versus Virgo, the mutable earth sign. It's mutable, not mutable. It's not able to be muted. I find one of these typos, and just about every time I look at one of these word clouds, and this one's no exception, and quite appropriate to find a typo in the Virgo word cloud. Anyway, when we think about Virgo, this more critical, analytical, discerning, fact-finding, skeptical, cool-headed, service-oriented, practical sign, right? So they're almost, well, they're polar opposites. But again, we're called to find the fusion. What is the integration? What is that point where we can integrate and synthesize these 2 archetypes? Here we'll see an illustration I've created for the symbolic representation of each of these 2 signs. Of course, Pisces, the double-bodied sign of the 2 fishes, and Virgo, the virgin, representing the pure and the perfected in many ways. So as we consider this shift from dreams to discernment, right? Let's look at what's sort of being constellated for us here. We think about, firstly, the north node moving into Pisces, and this invitation becomes one of surrender. And this word just keeps coming up over and over again as I look at the astrology, particularly of the first half of 2025, and really a theme I think that is going to emerge as a necessary skill for all of us to acquire in 2025. The ability to sort of surrender to the process and to, as it says here, trust the unseen and allow imagination and intuition to guide us. The idea of a flow state is another concept that I think is quite appropriate to this period that we're moving into. Surrender to your own personal flow. And here we see the question Pisces is asking us here is, what dreams are worth dissolving boundaries for? And what truths lie beyond logic? right? This is a perfect example of a sort of paradoxical question. What truths are beyond logic, right? Virgo is all about what is logical, right? What is analytical, what is linear. Pisces is asking us to take a sort of non-linear approach to problem solving over this time, right? So what is the truth that lies beyond logic? It's a pretty profound question. Not easy to answer, but one that's worth contemplating as we look at this North Node moving into Pisces. Then when we examine the South Node, which is now moving into Virgo, it's a reminder of both the gifts and the limitations that Virgo brings, which are perfectionism, routine, and practicality. But Virgo's real gift, what it holds for us, is the wisdom of discernment and service, right? There's something very powerful about Virgo's ability to really help us discern what is practical, what is the most useful, what can be the most effective. He wants to perfect that process. And of course, it can also lead to an over-analysis. One of the phrases I'm very fond of when I think about the shadow of Virgo, there's this phrase of analysis paralysis. You may have heard that term, right? Where you're almost afraid to make any decision. You get overwhelmed by a fear of getting it wrong, right? That's something that is really sort of pervades the shadow of this Virgo archetype. And as someone who has Pluto in Virgo and my South Node in Virgo, I'm actually having my nodal return during the course of this transit. So something I'm acutely aware of how profound these cycles can be. There is a fear of being wrong. There's a fear of, you can overanalyze anything. And that's something that we all are going to be called to sort of let go of, right? There's a sense of this, the inner critic. I think quieting the inner critic will be a good practice for us over the course of this nodal transit. So sometimes, as it says here, this overemphasis on the analytical and the practical will keep us tethered to the material at the expense of the mystical, right? Which is, again, here we're dealing with how do we navigate and integrate the material and the mystical, right? Anytime we lean too far into the shadow of these archetypes, it tends to create an imbalance and prevents the proper integration of the energies. So something we want to be on the lookout for. So here we go. What are we doing? We're navigating a paradox. How do we dream big without losing touch with reality? And how do we serve without sacrificing soul? Deep, deep questions that we'll be asking ourselves individually and sort of collectively. So personally, it's the art of integration. Huge theme here, right? So that North Node in Pisces is going to call us to release control, embrace creativity, and or dive deeper into spiritual practices. But it certainly will be a time for trusting intuition and sort of letting ourselves get carried by the currents of inspiration, even if it feels uncharted. It's a really interesting way of approaching something that can be a little intimidating. It can be scary to let go. Like the idea of letting go of control, right, which is the Virgo impulse. Virgo is very, very tightly wound, right? You say that a lot of personalities that have a lot of Virgo, they're wound too tight in many ways. They just cannot let go. They have very rigid boundaries. A lot of folks who suffer from things like obsessive compulsive disorder and a lot of phobias. They're just afraid of losing control. Where Pisces is saying, let it all hang out, man. Like, you got to let go. And I think that is a lesson that we're all being forced to reconcile and to reckon with. And I think if you hold on too tightly, it's going to be a bare knuckle ride. It's not going to be very pleasant. I think we're being called by the cosmic energy and the flow to sort of release, let go, trust our intuitive capacities to navigate us on the current of our own personal and collective destinies in some ways. So a tall order for many of it, and again, if you have a lot of Virgo here and this is triggering this axis for you in your chart, this is really going to be a period of challenge, most likely for those who have a lot of Virgo placements in their charts. So there's that, and then if we think, that Virgo South Node, these old patterns of rigidity or perfectionism are going to resurface, and they need to be reevaluated. So the question here, the question that the South Node in Virgo asks is, where have you been holding on too tightly to systems or routines that no longer serve your growth? So it's not just letting go, it's letting go of what no longer serves. There are some things that we've learned, some ways of being that probably just no longer apply to the new world that we're moving into. And it's tough. It's going to be tough to let go, but that's this process, and it's a slow process. That's why we get 18 months in order to really allow this growth to happen. And of course, it gets punctuated by the eclipses that will take place over the course of the next year and a half, right? So we're going to get eclipses in Pisces and in Virgo starting this spring and fall, and those will be points, and as they come closer, we'll look more deeply into them, but those are sort of the windows of intense opportunity to really embrace these calls for change, for reassessment, for reevaluation, for recalibration, particularly releasing. The South Node is showing us, it's the gifts. Take what was useful and valuable, but don't try to carry the baggage forward. That's only going to hold us back. So the baggage of our perfectionism, of these routines that have become self-limiting and are not allowing us to actually flow, to get into the flow of our lives, those need to be let go. So, profound message there. The other thing, this is an interesting phrase, the healing power of vulnerability. We're going to feel very vulnerable. I think we all have a sense of vulnerability. The way the world is changing so quickly, we're vulnerable to the environment, we're vulnerable to economic uncertainty, we're vulnerable to political uncertainty. This is a time of sort of leaning into that in some ways, and there's something to be healed within this. And this is Pisces teaching us that to truly connect with the divine or with others, we must let down our guard. Again, not something that is easily done. Yet, if we can use the Virgo side, right, that this healing often requires tangible steps. So therapy, right, healthy habits, learning to say no. Right? This will be a time, I would guess, where many of us will seek some sort of therapy for healing ourselves. Right? There's a great opportunity to go into, psychotherapy, couples therapy, aromatherapy, any form of therapy that's really about self-care. There's a real emphasis on self-care during this time. And then, creating healthy habits. And of course, the meta theme here, can we weave the sacred into the mundane? That's really what we're being called to do. That's sort of the quintessential energy of this transit. Now, if we shift to considering this on an interpersonal level, here we're talking about relationships in the flow. This idea of a flow state is the meta theme here that's emerging. Pisces and Virgo is saying, hey, balance your compassion with clarity. So Pisces loves unconditionally, but it can also blur boundaries and leave us drained or entangled. Virgo, on the other hand, is demanding precision and accountability, but can risk becoming overly critical. So Pisces love is unconditional. The Virgo love is rather conditional. It says, yeah, I need you to really be accountable, and I need some very practical things from you in order to have this relationship. And again, here we're having to integrate these paradoxes. So what's going to emerge for us in relationships over this 18 months are themes of sacrifice and service, this notion of creating healthy boundaries. It's going to become an interesting focus for all of us in our relationships. And then the themes of, forgiveness and healing are likely to take center stage. So it's good to be aware of. Now, when we pivot to a collective perspective on this, what we'll talk about here is this shifting the karmic story. And this is what, as I said in the beginning, this background frequency, this sort of karmic evolution of the collective tends to be guided by this nodal dance around the zodiac. So what we're going to get here is a profound change in the world's energetic focus. And if we think about the last 18 months, as I said, where Aries and Libra's karmic lessons were around autonomy and diplomacy, two of the key themes of Aries and Libra respectively. And we could see, what happened was they did kind of play out in rather polarizing ways on the global stage over the last 18 months. So how do we take a different direction when we go into Pisces and Virgo? Hopefully we'll feel a little quieter, but as I say here, no less transformative. So we'll have to stay tuned to see if that bears truth. So themes here we're looking at, right? Surrender and trust. This notion of environmental stewardship. I think Virgo is very focused on the environment, and I would predict that we're going to get a lot of shift into the focus into environmental issues. And then the healing the collective psyche. Big focus on mental health, I think, will emerge. And again, we got to be careful of the shadow here. There's an interesting paradox, potentially, where Virgo is very focused on health, our well-being. It's Mercury-ruled sign. So the idea of mental health falls into the umbrella of Virgo's domain or purview. Consider that against the shadow of Pisces, which can be associated with addictions, escapism, delusions, denial, right? There could be a tendency for many during these times to want to try to escape reality through drugs, through alcohol, through fantasy, through going into virtual gaming worlds. It'll be a very interesting time, which would only exacerbate the mental health problems, right? I think collectively we'll be called to really recalibrate and find a new balance. A lot of this environmental issues, the social inequality, issues around work, and as I said, the environment are going to become front and center. We're going to be grappling with those as a collective. My guess is that issues like universal basic income will become a very interesting topic that we'll start to grapple with as AI starts to replace more and more jobs in the market. The whole notion of what it means to work, I think, is coming under incredible evolutionary stress. Sort of this, what do they call it? I'm drawing a blank on the word. Epigenetics, right? This is something that an evolutionary force that works not through the biology, but through the culture. So this sort of epigenetic evolutionary pressure to change our relationship to work. What does it mean to work? What does it mean to live? What does it mean to thrive? What does it mean to be in the flow of life? These are profound questions, and ones that we'll probably all be sort of grappling with over the coming year and a half, right? So I think that's part of healing the collective psyche here. So what's the bigger picture here that we need to look forward to? Well, we're moving into a new karmic chapter, collectively and personally. This weaving metaphor is quite nice. I think this is the axis of the dream weaver. Pisces dreams, but Virgo will diligently weave it into some rather practical, tangible tapestry. It's not just about escaping, and it's not about clinging to the rigid systems of the past. It's about finding divine in the details and the dream in the discipline. Those are a couple of really beautiful metaphors to sort of take away from this. The divine in the details, not the devil in the details, but the divine is also there. And the dream in the discipline. Again, this is paradoxical thinking, but that's what the nodal dance is inviting us to embrace. Integrate these paradoxes. So here's the question for 2025. This is simple yet profound, right? So how will you balance surrender with service? How do we balance imagination with integrity? That's what resolves the tension of these two opposites, and that's where we get the growth, profound growth, right? On all levels, personally, relationally, collectively. So dream deeply, act consciously, and trust that this new chapter is exactly where we are meant to be. So, from dream to discernment, this is the process we're all going through collectively together. So, again, background frequency, 18-month process that we're moving into, and it's not like this is going to happen overnight, although often sometimes we can have something very, very obvious when you get the shifting between two signs, you just feel something, a background frequency shift, if you will. So be aware of that in yourself, be aware of that in your relationships, in your communities, in your families, in your workplace, and try to bring this more, profound sense of surrender to your life. I think it will serve us in the long run. It certainly is not going to be a time for holding on tightly to outmoded routines, patterns. There's a letting go here. There's a sort of floating and flowing that is required of us at this time. So I hope you can lean into that and float on, as Modest Mouse would say. All right, that's it for now. If you find this helpful, as always, like, subscribe, notifications. Trying to grow the channel, and it's happening. I think this is going to be a year of. I think people are waking up to the need for having this perspective, and so I'm happy to be able to share it with as many people who want to listen. So, all right, till next time, everyone. Sanam.